Naruto CCG Set 8 Battle of Destiny. What a time to be alive. Battle of Destiny was an extremely unique time to be a Naruto duelist because a Tier 0 deck would once again rise from the ashes and take over the metagame, but this time it was intentionally made. In this set, Bandai released much more powerful versions of the Sound 5, and it split the fanbase into two sets. So you had people who played the Sound 5, and they were primarily water duelists who were taking advantage of the brand new Tier 0 set that had been handed to them by Bandai, or you played as one of the other elements and your deck was centered around beating water decks. The nerd community has had a ton of great rivalries over the years. We have the Horde versus the Alliance. We have PlayStation versus Xbox. We have Opais versus Thick Thighs. We have fans of the PlayStation Vita versus people who are wrong. But the Naruto CCG is where men were made. You were either a water Tier 0 deck duelist, or you were an anti-water deck duelist. Bandai can pretty much have my heart and soul for this set, because it was a glorious time to be a part of the game. I loved the idea that they actually took a concept from the show and used it to model an entire set in their card game, because you were either on the side of the Sound 5, who were trying to get Sasuke away from the village, off to Orochimaru, or you were on the side of the Leaf, the Sand, and everybody else who was important to the story at the time, who was trying to fight against the Sound Ninja. Guess which side your boy was on? Okay, enough of this wannabe card game historian nonsense. This set was my time. I ran these streets when this set came out. This is when I started taking the game very seriously. We found weekly tournaments to go to, and I went there and I took names. I loved this set. It was essentially the best time to be a duelist in this game if you were a fan of water decks. And I had been a water purist since day one with Zabuza and Haku in set 1. Set after set after set, we get one or two little good cards thrown at us every once in a while, and sure, I guess Manda decks were kinda sort of a thing, but this was the true time to be a fan of the Water Ninja. But enough hype! Let's take a look at the boss monsters of Battle of Destiny. Let's go ahead and start with Sakon and Ukon. So, Sakon's effect is very simple. If he's in the same team as Ukon, he's a 7/5, so you essentially used him for his 5 support. Ukon was a fairly unique ninja because he could only be sent out to battle with Sakon, but during the attack phase, you could actually put him in any team that you want on your side of the field. It just meant that if that team that you put him in did not have Sakon in it, then that team could not go out to battle a second time until you reorganized your teams so that Sakon and Ukon were in the same team. Most of the time, though, you were going to use Sakon and Ukon as a part of the same team, and because they worked off of each other, it was essentially like having one ninja who gave you 8 support.
Listen,
Udo,
I don't want to tell you how to,
talk about card game archetypes.
but you're not supposed to start all out. You're supposed to start small and then work up to it.
I am starting small.
Oh, good for you. Holy crap.
Jirobo was designed to be your head ninja. When he was sent out to battle, you discarded one of your opponent's chakra, and then you gained 1 chakra from your discard pile. He was crucial for stomping out your opponent's plans, because if you knew the metagame and you knew what type of deck your opponent was playing by the time he hit the field, then you could select very specific chakra from their discard pile to stop them from casting Jutsu that could stop your plans. For example, if your opponent was using lightning at all, then you would always get rid of their lightning chakra to stop them from using release of chakra. He was basically an answer to Jutsu cards without actually needing to be a Jutsu answer. And the fact that he also stacked up your chakra area so that you could get your Jutsu off, oh, so good. Tayuya came out with that or support, and every ninja battling against her ninja's team gets -1/-1. This is the kind of effect you would find on a 3-chakra jutsu, and it's just on Tayuya all the time for free. For support, plus if your opponent's main team has 3 ninja in it, your opponent's team loses 3 team power automatically. So it was essentially like having 7 team power on your side. She also had another little quirk, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we get to this next ninja, I do have to warn you, I am about to show you a fairly graphic image. So if you have any kind of PTSD from playing the game at around this time, this is your warning. You may want to sit this one out, or maybe listen to the video with your eyes closed for a little bit, because I don't want to be responsible for being the cause of somebody's nightmares or heart attacks. Okay, if you're ready, let's go ahead and take a look at our next ninja. Kidomaru. What could I possibly say about Kidomaru to get you to understand just what an absolute nightmare this guy was for the game? Here's his effect. When he's sent out to battle and opposed, you can flip a coin, and if it's heads, give 1 damage to one of your opponent's ninjas. Okay. Listen to me for a second. This guy was the real deal. There were people who didn't even like the sound 4 being in their deck at all, who would still run 2 to 3 copies of this guy in their deck. You basically could not play the game if you either didn't use him or have a decent answer to him. So let's break it down. When he's sent out to battle and opposed, that means when he attacks and your opponent blocks with their main team or one of their chump blockers. Okay. It also activates every time you block your opponent's attack. Here's what made this so deadly. Your opponent could never accurately predict how much power they would need to step over Kidomaru's team. Because if they went out to block, then there was always a chance you would deal 1 damage to one of their ninjas, and that ninja would be in injured status and thus either lose their effect if it wasn't valid, or lose a bunch of power. So you just never knew. Okay, he was very frightening because you never knew exactly what your field or your answer to him was going to look like before the battle actually happened. So if your opponent sent out some kind of meat puppet to block an attack, you flipped a coin. If it was heads, chances are you could start picking off your opponent's main team, and then they would have to start to make up for the fact that one of the ninja they were counting on is now borderline useless. He also picked off blockers, so if your opponent had an injured ninja that they were keeping back just to block an attack, well, that's gone now. That just put a timer on when they're going to have to start using their main team. It's not one of these weak little deal 1 damage to a healthy ninja, or one of these change the target to injured status. No, 1 damage is 1 damage. You see a healthy ninja, that's an injured ninja. You see an injured ninja, that's a dead ninja. And you may be thinking, okay, well, it's a coin flip. You can't really count on a coin flip, so why on earth do people think this is so good? People. Every time you're sent out to battle and opposed, you are going to get this effect off at least twice per match. And you are going to get at least 6 chances. The typical game of Naruto is going to last until about turn 8. If you get him down on turn 4, and you attack and block every single turn, then that is 8 chances to actually get this effect off. There were times where if you got Kidomaru's effect off twice in one game, like if you attack, get the effect off, and then your opponent attacks into you and you get the effect off, your opponent would actually just scoop up their field and give up right then and there because it was such an irritating thing to have to deal with. It all goes back to the idea of Cop Naruto. You don't know if he's going to deal 1 damage to one of your ninjas, but you know that your opponent has the ability to do that, and because of its unpredictability, there was no way to accurately assess what you would have to do to be strong enough to beat his team. Even when all of the other sound ninja inevitably fade off into the distance, Kidomaru would be around to stay. If you have the chance to use Kidomaru, chances are you were gonna use Kidomaru. Alright guys, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dudes of all teen ages, the man, the myth, the legend, Kimimaro. Kimimaro came in two delicious flavors. He was either the most irritable thing on the field that made your opponent never want to touch the game again, or you could play the actual good game-winning one that took the game really seriously and won in a timely manner due to a very efficient effect. We're going to look at both. So Kimimaro Assault from Behind was always the one that I personally preferred because, again, his effect was so tilting, you had no idea unless you actually fought against it. Basically, during the exchange of Jutsu, you can swap the positions of your opponent's ninjas around. So you could choose a brand new head ninja for that team. And because it happened during the exchange of Jutsu phase, you could do it in response to your opponent trying to use some kind of effect against you. If your opponent summons a Gamabunta, guess what? Now we have a back ninja as the head ninja. That Gamabunta is completely useless. If you're someone who likes Formation Shikamaru, then you can choose the head ninja of their team, and Shikamaru is now negating their effects. And my personal favorites, if your opponent is playing a Rasengan or Chidori deck, as soon as they drop that Rasengan or Chidori, you make another ninja, the head ninja, and it fizzles. No. It's worse than fizzling. Its effect is applied successfully, but now your opponent has a 10 combat ninja in the back where it's giving 0 support. Oh, it was beautiful. I love this card. And then, of course, once again, you have the actual good Kimimaro. One of the most suggestive cards that I've ever seen in the game. His flavor text is, "I've hardened my bones to the limit." And believe me, some bones were hardened once he dropped the field. They'll penetrate beyond your sand shield. Oh yeah, some sand shields were penetrated once this guy hit the field. The most powerful pike. Oh yeah, your pike felt pretty powerful, because when this ninja's team wins a victory, you win 1 battle reward, and when it wins an outstanding victory, you win 2 battle rewards. So if your opponent tries to stall for time, guess what? Blocking him with a ninja was the same as not blocking him at all. If you wanted to throw out an injured Naruto or something to take his team's attack, you were still going to lose the 2 battle rewards. You might as well just let it happen. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say about his effect. You can't really use it in a clever way like you can Assault from Behind. But, I mean, you were still going to be assaulting them from behind, just in a very different and dangerous way, if you know what I mean. Now, you've probably noticed by now that all of the ninja that I've just discussed actually have a first effect that I've been completely ignoring until now, and that's because I wanted to first give you context for who these ninja were before I gave you their downside. You needed a very specific card called the Power of State 2 in play to use these ninjas efficiently, because if you didn't have Power of State 2, then each one of these ninjas' entrance cost and hand cost went up by 1. For your regular ninja, this wasn't that big of a deal, because let's be completely honest here. Kidomaru's effect is good enough to have him be a turn 5 ninja with 1 hand cost. Who in their right mind is going to not want to play this ninja because he's a turn 5 ninja with 1 hand cost? Nobody. Don't be ridiculous. Kimimaro, on the other hand, could be a little bit painful because then he's a turn 6 ninja that costs 2 cards from your hand. You might not necessarily want to be giving up 2 cards from your hand because your hand size is not going to be that big due to Water's inability to necessarily keep a consistent hand size. So let's take a look at the Power of State 2. At the beginning of your turn, you can discard 2 of your chakras to look through your deck for a State 2 Jutsu and put it in your hand. So this card essentially doesn't have an effect unless you are using it specifically for Jutsus. And I don't want to spoil anything here, but you will be using it for Jutsus. There are no costs, no downsides, no upkeep to keeping this card in your field. And chances are you weren't going to drop it on the field until you were ready to play one of your Sound Ninja, because you don't want your opponent using something like Kabuto to move it into the chakra area. To put it into better perspective, it was like Toon World with no cost that let you search your deck for a deck-specific card every single turn. But with such a powerful ninja lineup, surely there couldn't be a completely broken jutsu that you would be searching every turn with this card, would there? You guys underestimate just how much Bandai wanted this deck to be a thing. Ladies and gentlemen, Spider Bow, Fierce Rip. As though Kidomaru couldn't possibly get any better, he was given a jutsu card that maximized his effect. You target one ninja on the board, and you flipped 2 coins. If one, and I mean one of those coins is heads, give 2 damage to the target. Quick reminder, ninjas die when they receive 2 damage. And okay, sure. This only went off 75% of the time, which makes his flavor text the most hilarious thing of all time ever. Accuracy, it's not 100% accuracy, it's 75% accuracy. But power maximum was definitely an accurate description. There was a 75% chance that when you dropped this jutsu on the field, your opponent was going to have to discard one of their ninjas, and that ninja was your choice. It's not one ninja battling against the user, it's not one standby ninja, it's whoever you deem unworthy of being in the presence of the Sound 5 is now in the discard pile where you no longer have to look at their face. Let there be no tinge of uncertainty within any of your minds. This was a 3 of in every single Power of State 2 deck. And while you had Power of State 2 in play, you always had one of these in your hand. The only solace and security your opponent had was knowing that they would only have to deal with 3 of these in one match, though sometimes even that wasn't necessarily true. So while we're on the subject of State 2 Jutsu, there were in fact other State 2 Jutsu released for the other members of your team. As you can probably imagine, most of them were pretty good, but admittedly, they were just balanced. They were balanced in a set where you were playing the most unbalanced thing that had ever come out of Bandai's mind. So you just didn't use most of them, but we will look at least one here, called Our Hot Fist, which was a Jirobo jutsu that actually discarded your opponent's battle rewards if your team won a victory or an outstanding victory. This was a way for State 2 decks to play a slightly weaker early game in order to build up resources for a decent late game. Because in the late game, if your opponent tried to stall for time, then you could drop a couple of Our Hot Fists to get rid of all of your opponent's battle rewards. So they weren't going to pull off some sneaky, I'm going to stop your ninjas from going out to battle for a turn to really quickly get in 4 battle rewards and win the game kind of strat. No, they were going to have no battle rewards, and their entire early game dominance was going to be for naught. This wasn't the most common thing to see at the time, but it was a fairly common thing to see for most decks. Kimimaro himself got a few fairly decent State 2 jutsu. We have Bracken Dance Vine, one back ninja battling against the user. You could make it the head ninja, and it also becomes a 0/0. So it was essentially like having Assault from Behind, but that ninja was also rendered a 0/0, just in case it wasn't bad enough. You also had Bracken Dance Flower, which was, I kid you not, they basically gave Kimimaro a Rasengan Chidori that he himself could use. The target gets +5/+0, and if you win a victory or outstanding victory, give 2 damage to one ninja battling against the target. So this was a very simple way to just really quickly off one of the ninja that was fighting against you. It was especially good for stall tactics where your opponent had a ninja that could keep healing every turn. Because with this, you could either let that ninja keep healing every turn, or just straight up nope one of your opponent's battling ninjas out of existence. Then finally, we have my trump card, the Bracken Dance. Bracken Dance is a fairly controversial topic for most people who had State 2 decks, and let me explain why. It was seen as a non-competitive jutsu because it was very expensive, it was fairly unnecessary, but let me assure you, Kudo-kun ran Bracken Dance, and it was one of my favorite cards in the set. What it did, if it went off, was change every ninja on your opponent's side of the field into injured status. You pull this off once, there's no coming back. It is so hard to deal with somebody who has successfully pulled off a Bracken Dance. And in my personal opinion, I feel like this needs to be in just about everybody's State 2 decks, okay? At least one copy. It's searchable with Power of State 2, so you don't have to use it, or you don't have to pull it if you feel you don't need it. But the fact that it was so overwhelmingly game-winning means that I think everybody should have at least tried to tack one into their decks. Is it a little expensive? Sure. But with Jirobo, you're going to be gaining 1 chakra every single turn anyway, and most State 2 decks used a ton of mission cards. So you were going to have the chakra, and you were going to run out of fierce rips at some point. You drop a Bracken Dance, especially when your opponent sends out a chump blocker to block Kimimaro's team while they wait for a better opportunity. You drop that Bracken Dance and baby, you win. You win. Trying to come back from a Bracken Dance is it's just not going to happen, baby. I remember earlier when I said Tayuya had another little quirk that we should talk about. Let's go ahead and talk about that now. You see, Tayuya's entire purpose within this team was to be the main jutsu user. Tayuya got the absolute best jutsu in the entire Sound Ninja 5 team. Yes, even though Fierce Bow Rip is a thing and technically is the best, Tayuya actually got the jutsu support that she needed. So first of all, summoning jutsu, you can search your deck for 1 card called Doki and put it as the head ninja of your team. Sure, this wasn't a State 2 card, but it was still a fairly decent way of bringing out Doki. Doki can only be sent out to battle in the same team as Tayuya, and when you're the attacker, you can put it in any one of your teams. So basically, you didn't have to go out to battle with Doki. You could just move Doki to your Tayuya team or any one of your other teams, just like you could with Ukon. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this isn't the best thing in the world. It's a little bit redundant because Doki was essentially just worse Ukon, but he was also a turn 3 ninja in a deck where you were running a ton of turn 4 ninja, so it was still viable. Now, you needed Doki to be in play to get some of these other jutsus off. For example, Demon Revolution, every ninja battling against you becomes an XX, where X is the lowest number amongst your opponent's combat and support values. So if you found 1 single ninja with 0 power, then every single ninja battling against you was 0 power. 1 chakra, useless team. GG. If you're looking for more of a State 2-y jutsu to run, then we of course have Chains of Fantasia. What a beautiful name. It gives all of your opponent's ninjas -3 support if you're willing to pay the chakra for it. It's a very flexible card because if you notice that you don't have to overpay for your opponent's team, for example, if they've only got 1 back ninja, then you really only have to pay the initial 1 water plus 1 more chakra to make that ninja basically useless for that team battle. Hey, you notice how like the one weakness of the Sound 4 ninja is that none of them have any mental power, including Tayuya? Well, they released a card called Musical Manipulation that made it so you cannot perform mental power battles for 2 turns. Weaknesses.
What are those?
Delay in the assault stopped your opponent from playing any of those pesky caged birds or anything they may have. And just when you think water decks could not possibly have any more aces up their sleeve, you hit them with the selecting the strongest. Selecting the strongest. A turn 4, 2-hand cost mission card. And what did it do to deserve that extra hand cost? Well, each player selects 1 symbol, then discards all of their in-play ninjas that don't have that symbol. This punished your opponent for playing a deck that wasn't mono-color. It also just straight up nixed any player's access to staples. What's Naruto still doing in play? What is this, kindergarten?
Leave!
You're using Sakura in a mental power deck with Shikamaru? That's too much mental power, my dude. I think you're gonna have to pick one of those.
No!
Speaking of Shikamaru, you said you were playing a fire deck. So what's Shikamaru doing there?
Go! No, don't turn around! Get out of here!
The entire Naruto metagame is built around staples and using staples efficiently. Having this on the field is like having your opponent get rid of half of their pieces in a game of chess. Because up until like the 4th or 5th turn, you're probably playing primarily around staples. Not a lot of people are using a mono element deck where they only have ninja of a single element. Sure, I guess you could also use this for wind decks.
But we're not on
Wind decks.
Are we? No.
Now, you may be thinking that the game sounds incredibly lame at this point, because you essentially played water or you lost, and understandably so, but that's actually not the case at all. Despite how powerful water was, there were at least 2 other archetypes that rose up to challenge it, and they didn't just roll over and lose to water decks. In fact, some would argue that one of these archetypes unintentionally clashed with water as the top deck of the format. In one of my earlier episodes, I pointed out that at some point Gaara would get his time to shine, and well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Gaara's about to shine. Up to this point, Gaara was pretty well known for having a wide range of jutsu at his disposal. He always seemed to get somewhere between 2 and 4 new jutsu per set, and this is the set where it all starts to come together. A brand new Gaara had been released known as Immense Power Gaara, and he could look at the top 5 cards of the deck and get 1 sand jutsu out of it every time he went out to battle. This is both on attack and defense. For some players, everything was starting to click into place. If Gaara could get 1 jutsu every single turn, and he already had access to a huge suite of jutsus to choose from the previous sets, then a Gaara-centered deck that focused on spamming jutsu would probably be a pretty good answer to what water was bringing at the time. You see, earlier when I pointed out that water doesn't really have any weaknesses, I kind of lied. There is one huge weakness that water has, and that is that none of the water effects are valid. So, if you have a deck that focuses on overwhelming them and forcing them all into being in injured status, then essentially water decks didn't have an answer to you. So Gaara would come in like Goku and basically save your entire game from being lost. And this is what we now know as the Gaara over 9000 deck type. As the game would go on, other deck types similar to this would form, and the over 9000 or O9K, as it's sometimes called, deck type would arise, but this is definitely where it had the most prevalence. As I said before, what made Gaara so good wasn't necessarily just that he had access to good jutsu, it was the wide variety of jutsu you had to choose from. Sure, there were some staples that you always played when you played a Gaara deck, but there was always a little bit of room for experimentation and conforming the deck to what you needed it to do. Let's get some of the staples out of the way first, though. Starting with Sand's Tomb, arguably Gata's absolute best jutsu card. So you need to be at least entrance cost 4 or more Gata to use it, and you can take one ninja and move it to the bottom of the deck. Yes, this was a Gata only 8 trigrams. Opponent can't kill you with Kidomaru if you don't have a Kidomaru. Sand Tsunami. Every ninja in one of your opponent's teams are all changed to injured status. This is important wording because it doesn't just say battling teams, and it doesn't say the team battling against the user. So if your opponent did decide to chump block, you could still choose one of their teams and just turn them all into injured status. Once again, this was extremely good against the Sound Ninja, because if your opponent kept all the Sound Ninja in one team, then all of those ninja are now useless. Regardless of what you chose to do with the rest of your deck, these are the 2 jutsu that you had to run in this metagame. But you also had access to Shield of Shukaku, which would give your team plus 10 power or plus 10 mental power, a really good answer to your opponent's mental power decks. And Giant Sand Burial, which discarded all of your opponent's injured ninjas. If for some reason you were worried about your opponent having a lot of healing in their deck, this was a very efficient way of getting rid of Sound Ninja permanently. You injured them all with Sand Tsunami, and then you finished them with Sand Burial. Reaching back into the previous sets, we had Sand Cocoon, which would let you return a Gata to your hand and then put a new one in play. This not only acted as a way of healing Gata, but it also let him avoid targeting, because if your opponent targeted him with a jutsu and you returned him to your hand, it was the same as there being no target at all. Sand Coffin was once again a fairly efficient way to either injure a ninja or guarantee that you were going to win a victory, because you could turn your opponent's main ninja into a 0/0, which would cut off their power. And if you were really daring and wanted to break out and use a slightly different Gata of the desert, then you could pick one of the Gatas that has an entrance cost of 5 or more, and then use Infinite Sandstorm Devastation. This wasn't quite as efficient because you were losing Gata's effect if you weren't using that one specific Gata, but it was still an option that was available to players at the time. While we're here in Winds talking about Jutsu, there's also Cyclone Scythe Jutsu, which was a Temari jutsu, but you would often use Temari in a Sand deck, so didn't really matter as much. She basically got rid of a ninja by returning it to the hand, or if your opponent had a ninja with a water symbol, which I'm sure they would, then you would put it at the bottom of the deck. The high jutsu cost is a little bit of a turnoff here, but the thing is, if your opponent is focusing on getting Gata off of the field, then having Temari be the user of a jutsu card is actually fairly beneficial. Protean was a way to continue getting more jutsus or missions from the deck. You basically look at the top 5 cards of your deck, get yourself a jutsu or get yourself a mission. It was more common to get a jutsu, obviously, because this was a very fast and aggressive deck where you really wanted to overwhelm your opponent as early as possible to guarantee a late game sweep, but you could also get yourself a mission card if you really needed it. The other cool thing about this is you can return the cards in any order you want, so you can stack your deck in any way you need. Information Gathering was a fairly efficient draw card at the time. Basically, you flipped 3 coins and you drew 1 card for each heads. You were almost always going to get at least 1 draw from this, and usually that was seen as good enough, but most of the time you would be seeing at least 2 card draws, and in very rare instances you were seeing 3. Yes, sometimes you would get 0 heads and you would get 0 cards, but it was extremely rare, and it sort of was offset by the fact that you had a chance to get 3. When this turn 3 Temari came into play, you could look at all the cards in your opponent's hand and discard one of their mission cards. This is basically an upgraded version of the one that gets rid of Jutsu. Gara was so efficient at using Jutsu that the turn 1 Temari that got rid of Jutsu was seen as a little bit less useful than this one that got rid of a mission, especially if you could use this to preemptively get rid of your opponent's power of state 2 before they had a chance to use it. This was also a ninja with 3 support, so it was a little bit better than playing the other Temari with only 2 support. And once you get her effect off, you can immediately turn her into Shikamaru and Temari, one of the best platoons released around this time. During the exchange of Jutsu, you can discard 2 of your chakra in order to either make it so you and your opponent were having a mental power battle, or say that there can be no mental power performed during this turn. So yes, it was Fleximaru, but it was a much much better version of Fleximaru. Not only did you get this effect without having to control how many cards are in your hand, but your stats are going to be way better because you have 5 mental power as opposed to 4. You've got access to tuning Jutsu, which is sometimes very useful, especially considering your typing is Earth, and you have 4 support. If for some reason you were running a Winds deck, but you didn't want to run specifically a Gata over 9,000, you could also run this Gata, which basically is a free drop if your opponent has more ninjas than you do. And last but not least, kind of a bit of an oddball choice here, but Shizune was very, very good for Gata over 9,000 decks. So at the end of each of your turns, you can discard 2 of your chakras to put 1 card from your discard pile on top of your deck. Let me explain why this is busted in a Gata over 9,000 deck. Whenever you play a Jutsu, it goes to your chakra area. So you play a Jutsu, you put it in your chakra area, then at the end of your turn, you discard that Jutsu along with 1 other card, and then put that Jutsu back on top of your deck. And then Gata, because of his effect, will let you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, get a copy of that Jutsu back, and then you just have access to that Jutsu once again. It was a very, very efficient way of recycling Gata Jutsu, and it was a little bit balanced because you couldn't use this with any element. You couldn't use this to continuously recycle Rasengan or Chidori or Spider Bows unless you were building a very strange deck that specifically revolved around it. I was a very big fan of this card at the time. The other deck type that emerged around this time was, in fact, the Uchiha. So we got Sasuke's mom and dad, which are adorable cards on their own, but they also had fairly decent effects. Fugaku made all of your Uchiha ninja +2/+0 at all times, and the effect was valid, which is pretty good. And Mikoto Uchiha gave all of your in-play Sasuke's +1/+1. So the trick here is if you have both Fugaku and Mikoto in play, then your Sasuke's were getting +3/+1, which is pretty darn powerful if you think about it. The fact that Mikoto has 3 support doesn't hurt either. But of course, I mean, if you're going to release Sasuke's parents, then you should probably also release an Itachi that kills Sasuke's parents. No, I am not joking. Yes, this is real. So at the beginning of your turn, if you have Fugaku and Mikoto in play, you can discard both of them to search your deck for any 2 cards and put them in your hands. This was actually a pretty funny little synergy that you could have going on your side of the field. And the great thing is, you could immediately off both of the parents, but then play the parents again. In fact, it was very common to run multiple Fugakus in your deck, so you dropped Itachi, you got rid of Fugaku and Mikoto, you searched your deck for 2 cards, and then you played another Fugaku so that Itachi still got the power boost. In what I consider the strangest turn of events, though, there was a Sasuke Itachi platoon released at this time that was probably the most powerful form of Sasuke that you could play at the time. When you put this ninja in play by sending your Sasuke to the chakra area, then you can put growth coins on this ninja equal to the number of growth coins that were on Sasuke. And there were definitely some Sasukes released at the time that could get a ton of growth coins. One of the most well-known ones are, of course, the one I looked at last set, which was the Sasuke and Sakura platoon, which could get a growth coin every time you were willing to give up a battle reward. But on top of that, if you consider all of the cards that were meant to support Sasuke at the time, then this was actually pretty good because you could have Sasuke turn into Sasuke and Itachi, and then get all of the bonuses of Fugaku and Mikoto, and still be able to use cards like Chidori. So yeah, if you're running something like a Freedori Sasuke deck, you can turn Freedori into this card for your late game, and it's actually a pretty nice little upgrade. Of course, the only downside here is you're giving up your ability to play an Itachi, but if you have a Sasuke-centered deck, then this is a good play. But Uchiha didn't just get ninja cards, they also got a couple of pretty neat little client cards. With Teaki, they could draw 1 card every time you played an Uchiha, which I don't have to tell you is pretty good. And with Uruchi, each time one of your Uchihas put in play, you can heal one of your ninjas. Normally you would choose between one of these 2, And Teaki was, of course, the more common choice, but you could also sideboard Uruchi and put that in your deck instead if your opponent was running something that constantly damaged your ninjas or turned them to injured status. Itachi got himself a new copy of Tsukuyomi, which basically took one of your opponent's ninjas and put it in their hands. Then you would randomly select cards from your opponent's hand and reveal them until you got to a copy of that ninja. And once you did, you would put that ninja back in play, but give 1 damage to it and discard any cards that were revealed due to this effect. So if your opponent was playing something that gave them a ton of hand draw, this would punish them really, really hard for it, because they would essentially end up discarding about half of their hand, and their ninja now had 1 damage on it. And then, of course, they had to give Uchihas something to deal with water decks, so they gave them Fire Style, Fireball Jutsu. Every ninja with a water symbol battling against the user give 1 damage to the target. So this was, again, a really great way to injure all of your opponent's State 2 ninjas and keep up with them in the metagame. Another great thing about this card is it is, of course, generic, so you don't need to necessarily use it with an Uchiha. You can use it on a more fodder ninja, so if your opponent does try to use something like Spider Bow to get rid of the ninja using this jutsu, then they have to get rid of a fodder ninja, which is a pretty good position to put your opponent in. Would you believe me if I told you that despite all of the stuff that we just looked at, it wasn't even necessarily the main point of the set? So, the reason that this set is even called Battle of Destiny is because this is the set that's meant to represent the battle between Naruto and Sasuke in the Final Valley. So, believe you me, there were definitely some cards related to Rasengan and Chidori released in the set as well. The main card we have to look at here is the Final Valley. It's a permanent that lasts 4 turns, and any of your ninjas with the special power effect text, which is something we'll look at in a moment, are unaffected by your opponent's mission cards. The actual Naruto and Sasuke we got were both turn 3 ninjas with fairly beefy stats, which of course had the special power effect text and no growth. If you don't have Final Valley in play, they come out on turn 5, and this ninja cannot be targeted by jutsu and is unaffected by ninja cards. So when you were using Naruto or Sasuke or both, you could play the mission card, Final Valley, and on turn 3, you had ninjas that could not be affected by your opponent's effects. Final Valley gave them protection from mission cards, and they already had protection from jutsu and ninja cards. This also gave rise to a brand new type of deck. Now, if you're a Vanguard player, follow me on this one. It's kind of like when you had Royal Paladin decks and Shadow Paladin decks, and then at some point, they were merged into the same deck type. Because yes, Rasengan and Chidori decks were starting to see some viability. These were the new Rasengan and Chidori. First things first, they both give the user +7/+0, which, aw, they're finally boosting Chidori up in power to make it so that they're evenly matched. It's kind of cute. But with Rasengan, if you win a victory or an outstanding victory, you can take 2 of your opponent's battle rewards and put them in your chakra area so that you get even more jutsu. And with Chidori, you could take 2 of the cards from your opponent's hand and move them to the discard pile. So this kind of deck actually made it really easy to use both Rasengans and Chidoris. You would keep Naruto and Sasuke in 2 different teams and slowly build up 2 teams to go out and attack every turn. You saw some really great synergy, like using Rasengan to take 2 cards from your opponent's battle rewards and put them in the chakra area. And then when Rasengan is moved to the chakra area as well, you have exactly enough chakra to use Chidori. Now let's not beat around the bush. The other Chidori was still way more commonly used than this Chidori here, but it was an option. Time for the showdown. Let each player search their deck for a jutsu card and show it to their opponent and put it in their hand. This card could kind of come back and bite you because it also gave your opponent access to a jutsu card, but one of the neat little techs you could do is do this and then play something like Temari to look through your opponent's hand and get rid of the jutsu that they just got. Visualization of chakra basically gave you caught Naruto's effect, but way better, because during the exchange of jutsu, you could discard any number of your chakras to give your Naruto that much power during that turn. You also had a couple of options if you didn't really want to run Rasengan or Chidori, but for some reason you still wanted a slightly bigger Naruto or Sasuke. So this turn 2 Naruto, if your opponent has one or more sound ninjas in play, then it is a 5-0 regardless of whether it's healthy or injured, and it also has growth, which is very helpful. This Naruto was a lot like number 1 Rookie, where when it went out to attack by itself, you could choose one of your opponent's teams, and this ninja had to be battling against that ninja during that team. So if you wanted to use it against your opponent's biggest team, then you could have all of your other ninjas sort of sneak in and deal some extra damage. This was also a very common Naruto to use during Genin decks, because with your Genin decks, you could have this one take care of your opponent's main team, and then your other Youth of the Nation ninjas would go out and get some battle rewards. Next up, we have Sasuke, arguably the most powerful Sasuke that had been released to this point. When this ninja's put in play, you have to discard a jutsu or a mission card from your hand, and he has growth. So unfortunately, if you did growth him into play, that was kind of a problem because you would have to get rid of 2 jutsus or missions, which isn't worth it. But while he was in play, he had some pretty beefy stats. Of course, if you were playing with Fugaku and Mikoto, then he was an 8-3, which is pretty darn good. And he also has built-in protection from your opponent's jutsu and mission cards. Now remember last video where I said it was very unique that Sasuke had a Sasuke Sakura platoon because it was basically like having a Sasuke with mental power? Well, they released a Naruto and Shikamaru that basically did the same thing. It was like playing a Naruto that also has mental power. So during your opponent's organization phase, you can put this card back into your hand to get a Naruto and a Shikamaru from your discard pile and put them both in play, which is fine. It's not bad. It's pretty good effect-wise, but you were mainly playing it if you wanted to have a Naruto that was protected from your opponent's mental power. So at this point in the game, Toads were slowly starting to get absorbed by Rasengan decks, so if you were playing a Rasengan deck, you normally also played Toads, and vice versa. Toad Mouthtrap was a Jiraiya-only jutsu that let you select one of your opponent's teams, and then flip a Ninja Blade coin for each ninja in that team, and turn the ones that you get heads on into Standby Ninja. On top of that, they also can't go out to battle next turn. So if you're doing this on block, then you're getting yourself a much more powerful attack when it comes around to being your turn. Jiraiya also got himself Motto, and this is going to be a little bit more water hate. Every ninja with both a water symbol and an entrance cost of 4 or lower gets 0 power during the turn. Boy, I wonder why they chose entrance cost 4 or less. Any guesses, guys? Kunoichi decks were getting a little bit more fleshed out with the release of cards like Temptation, which negates the effect text of every male ninja, so it rewarded you for playing female only, and it punished your opponent if they weren't. A new Tsunade was released. When she goes out to battle and is opposed, you can put 2 blade coins, symbolizing, I can't believe I'm about to say this, drug coins on one of your opponent's ninjas battling against you, and ninjas with drug coins can't be sent out to battle, but they do slowly disappear at the beginning of each turn. Obviously, this is a really good card, but it does also make me laugh a little bit. Could they really not come up with a slightly better name than drug coin? Call them knockout coins, or paralysis coins, or something. Drug coins are a little bit weird. You're literally distributing drugs to your opponent's ninjas, and then they sit back until they run out of drugs, and then you distribute more drugs. What is she, the Chicago Police Department? We also got a Tsunade and Katsuyu platoon, which is pretty cool. Any ninja in this ninja's team, including this ninja, cannot be the target of your opponent's jutsu cards and is unaffected by ninja cards. So the exact same protection that is on your Naruto's and Sasuke's, but she actually has much beefier stats. She's great as both a head ninja or a support ninja, so she can be used as either. And also, since Katsuyu is also a girl, you could still use this as a part of Kunoichi decks. Kotohime also existed. Not gonna lie to you, Kotohime kind of sucks, but she was technically some Kunoichi support because all of your opponent's male ninjas battling against her get -1 support. Man, I really wish she wasn't a turn 3 ninja. If they had actually had the nerve to make her like a turn 1 ninja, I actually think she would have been pretty decent. But as it stands, she was just there until something better came along. And ironically enough, we're going to end this by looking at a male ninja who actually was meant to synergize with female decks. While this ninja's battling, it gets +1 power for each female ninja in your team, and -1 power for each female ninja in the team battling against you. So he could actually get fairly big if you were running him in a female deck. I'm not saying it was the most common thing, but you would see this every now and then. They were finally starting to take Mill kind of seriously, and they were giving that archetype to Kiba and Akamaru for whatever reason. Kiba and Akamaru could turn into the double-headed wolf, and the double-headed wolf got wolf fang over fang. This let you mill cards from the top of your opponent's deck based on what your current combat value was. So if you were able to get his combat value up to about 10, then you could discard a quarter of your opponent's deck. Believe it or not, this is a fairly efficient way to mill your opponent out, because there were very simple ways that you could beef up your double-headed wolf stats. Dynamic marking was pretty unique. It basically let you keep looking at the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck, and as long as this card was in your chakra area, your Akamaru would mill every single time he was sent out to attack. Keep in mind, you can put 3 of these in the chakra area, and then mill 3 from the top of your opponent's deck every time you attack, so it adds up. And for a little bit of consistency, we also got Man-Beast Transformation, which let you look through your deck for either a double-headed wolf or a wolf fang over fang, show it to your opponent, and put it in your hand. And this isn't necessarily a mill card, it can be used in just about anything, but another way was a way to give you a second turn after this turn ends. You can argue that this is useful in just about any deck, but it was most useful in the mill deck archetype because you could really make use of that extra turn to quickly finish off your opponent. Like 2 double-headed wolf fang over fangs are probably going to finish your opponent off on turn 6. Taijutsu decks got a little bit of love with Taijutsu decks got a little bit of love with a couple of fairly interesting cards. So Rock Lee got the 5th Gate Opens, which was a really common card to see in people's decks at the time. At the beginning of each of your turns, you gave him a +1/+0 coin, called a Gate coin, and when you got your 5th Gate coin, he died at the end of the turn. So that made it so he was relevant throughout essentially the entire game, because you played him on turn 0 and he was a 1/0. Then next turn he was a 2/0, then a 3/0, then a 4/0, then a 5/0, then finally a 6/0, and then he died. So he was fairly useful, actually, at the time, especially since he had growth and you could boost each of those numbers by 1. And by the time he did discard himself, he was normally not that useful anyway. But then you had Rock Lee Berserk, who was a little bit more fun to play with, in my personal opinion. This is the representation of Loopy Fist, or Drunken Fist as it's originally known, Rock Lee from the show. At the beginning of each of your turns, you have the option of putting a potion coin on Rock Lee. And that coin is treated as a +1/+1 during your turns, and a -1/-1 during your opponent's turns. Something that's important to point out here is negative numbers do exist in Naruto. So you can't just get yourself down to 0 and then have that be it. If you have negative power, then that actually takes away from your overall team power. So it was very important to play this Rock Lee correctly. If you wanted to boost him up to be a support ninja, then that was fine, but you had to accept that during your opponent's turns, he would actually decrease the power from your team power. If you wanted to play him as a head ninja, that was also fine, and usually he was played to be essentially a one-man army who would go out to attack by himself every turn. He was just powerful enough that your opponent did have to take him seriously and do something about him, but he was still weak enough that you could sometimes get away with just getting free battle rewards off of him every single turn. Now, if you're taking your Taijutsu deck seriously, then you can actually play the Jutsu card Loopy Fist, which would make it so that each of your potion coins were treated as +2/+2 for the turn. So your opponent goes in expecting your Rock Lee to have negative power because of how many potion coins he has, and then you take each of those coins and you actually make them double as efficient as they normally are. And it's actually a pretty shocking way to win some games. It's kind of like the magic cylinder of the Naruto card game. Also, if I could just take a second here. They really couldn't come up with a better name than potion coins. Okay, so let me get this straight, Bandai. We can't call these sake coins. We can't call these loopy coins, drunken coins, nothing like that. But drug coins are okay. So we can distribute drugs, but if we mention alcohol or mention sake, that's where we're crossing the line. Okay, alright. Just wanted to double check. Just to give it a quick mention here while we're in Lightning, there was an interesting Irika released at this time who gave all of your in-play ninjas with no effects text +1/+1, and this included negated effects text. Now, this ninja doesn't really do anything at this point in the game, but keep him in mind. Vanilla decks may be a little bit more relevant than you think a little bit later in the future. And even if you aren't running a vanilla deck, you could store a couple in your side deck, and then if you know your opponent is playing Formation Shikamaru, then you can punish them for that by actually giving your ninjas +1/+1 when your opponent is negating them using Shikamaru's effect. Every set has to throw some trash tier Naruto villains into it, and this was of course no exception. The one we got this time was the Kagero clan, which is just... they're a bunch of really ugly people who fuse together into one extremely ugly person. Don't worry about it, okay? It's not that important. It really didn't have too much relevance on the metagame, but there were two fairly important things that came out of it. First was Arashi Fuma, who was a way to run a lightning ninja that had 3 support, an extremely rare thing to see at the time, and extra relevant now because people were running selecting the strongest. So if you had a lightning deck and you didn't want to get rid of a Kurenai or something that had that 3 support but wasn't lightning, then you could run Arashi instead. This Kagero could move himself to the chakra area pretty much during any exchange of jutsu to turn into a female 5/5 version of that Kagero. I feel like this is either extremely empowering to transgenderism or it is fairly offensive to transgenderists. I don't know exactly how that scale goes. It is a male ninja that can turn into a female ninja, and the female ninja is like its true form. Never mind, okay? Just pretend I didn't say anything. We're gonna go ahead and skip over that. That is just too much of a mess. A couple of the jutsus were kind of fine, like chakra threads. You chose one of the ninjas battling against you, and then any time you receive damage, that ninja also received damage. So you could do some fairly interesting things with that, especially if your opponent did something like Spider Bow one of your ninjas. You could have that ninja use chakra threads, and then even if your ninja dies from Spider Bow, then you could still give 1 damage to that ninja. Now, I will say they sort of wimped out a little bit here, and I wish they didn't, because if they didn't, it would have been a fairly interesting archetype to look at. It should have been if one of your ninjas receives damage, the target receives the same amount of damage, because then when your opponent spider bowed you, you could essentially have them be punished for that by having one of their ninja die as well. But because it limits it to receiving 1 damage, it wasn't the best thing in the world, but it was an option if you wanted to run the Fuma clan for one reason or another. Jirobo is a ninja that sucks, but he did get ninja art Wind Spider. I don't know what it is with this set and giving spiders like the most powerful cards. You could use this to move all of the ninjas in one of your teams to Jirobo's team, which could actually give you like this giant beefy team of like 6 ninjas, which if you're the one attacking could be pretty useful, because then you have this really big team for your opponent to deal with on their turn. And finally, we're going to look at a few of the staples that didn't really have another place that I could point them out at right here. Some fairly interesting early game ninja were coming out, like Kiba Last Ditch Escape Attempt. If you have him in play along with Akamaru, and either one of them or both of them are discarded, they go back to the hand, so you can actually keep playing them. And this is a really good way to make sure that they would stay alive if you were running a mill deck. This Neji was a fairly good answer to ninjas that didn't have valid effects, because if he's in injured status and then your opponent offs him, then you can give 1 damage to one of your opponent's ninjas that's battling against you. Shino was essentially a free ninja in any of your teams because you didn't have to organize him in a team, and during the exchange of jutsu, you can just swoop him up into one of your teams. That doesn't seem like the most effective thing in the world, but trust me, it was useful when your opponent was running Formation Shikamaru, because you could put Shino as the head ninja of your team, and then your head ninja was no longer being negated because Shino was now your head ninja. Shikamaru randomly got a fairly decent jutsu card in Shadow Strangle Jutsu. You could choose 1 ninja battling against you, flip a coin. If it's heads, it's discarded. If it's tails, it gets -3/-3. So if you use this against one of your opponent's back ninjas, you could basically get a win-win situation where either they were useless for the team because 3 support is normally what ninja gave, and you also have the chance of just straight up discarding them. Not dealing damage, not putting them in injured status, but just discarding them. We also had thinking mode, where you could look at all the cards in your opponent's hand and then draw 1 card if you have at least 1 mental power. This isn't the best jutsu in the world, but it lets you cycle through your deck a little bit faster. And also knowing what's in your opponent's hands to drop something like Temari to look through it and discard something useful is also fairly good. Ally of the Leaf was kind of cute because it was an attempt to give some comeback mechanics to the game. If your opponent did something in the early game to just absolutely demolish your side of the field, then it essentially gave you a free ninja drop. One-on-one fight gave you a pretty interesting way to stop your opponent's teams. Basically, you chose one of your teams that had only Leaf Ninja in it, and then you chose the same amount of your opponent's ninja, and none of those ninjas can go out to battle this turn, but your opponent does get a chance to counter this by reorganizing their teams at the beginning of the battle phase. Emergency Treatment gave you a very simple way of healing your entire field. It was just 1 battle reward to heal everybody, which is probably one of the reasons people were so gun-shy about playing Bracken Dance. Announcement of the pairing is fairly busted. You can use it to declare one of your teams, and then when that team goes out to attack, you can choose the blocking team for that ninja's team. There were tons of ways to abuse this at the time. If you were going to use something like an earth or a wind water deck, then you could actually choose which of your opponent's teams go out. If you have something to deal with their biggest team at the time, then you can do that. Or you can force them to send out a chump blocker so that you can get all of your effects off and your opponent doesn't have any counter to it. So you do something like have your opponent send out their Sasuke, block with your big old team of all of these State 2 ninjas, and then just slowly pick off your opponent's main team while they are helpless to do something about it. I'm well aware that this part of Naruto's history was a lot to take in, but don't worry, we're essentially done with everything that Set 8 brought us. I'm sure at least some of you are fairly excited for what we're going to be looking at next set. Bandai are about to make some fairly big changes, not to the meta, but to the game itself. But I am sure you are all just about Naruto'd out for today, so we're just gonna have to get into that the next time we see each other. Psst, this is my super secret Set 8 Sound 5 Ninja deck list, by the way. Don't panic if you don't know what these cards are. The description will be your guide.